is mine. All right, let me just... All right, we're live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our special online hybrid event coming to you live from the Colby-Curtis Museum in Stanstead, Quebec. Woohoo! Yay! My name is Heather Darch, and I'm here with my colleague Glenn Patterson, and we are from the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network, and we're doing this special live event with wonderful historical societies from the Eastern Townships, and it's wonderful to have you all with us today. So we welcome our special audience online. We welcome the people who are here with us today, and we're broadcasting live from QAHN's Facebook page. And if you are on Facebook and you're watching, we would love to know where you're watching from. And throughout the day, if you have any questions or comments when you're on Facebook, please let us know. It would be great to check in with you as our day unfolds and find out if you have any comments and questions. And it would be super to know where you're coming from. The Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network, and I'll call it QAHN from now on because it's a bit of a mouthful. We are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to protect and preserve and promote the history of Quebec's history, but in particular of Quebec's English-speaking history. And you're most welcome to become a member of QAHN. Membership is open to everyone, individuals and historical societies and community groups. And membership gives you the benefits of being connected around the province to all the historical societies and museums and archives. Plus, you also get our quarterly publication called Quebec Heritage News. And this is written by local historians, by archivists, by professional historians, museologists, all about Quebec's history. And it's the kind of history that you don't hear about in the history textbooks. So it's the way more interesting history. And it's great with beautiful pictures, colored, and you get from all ages of people writing as well. So that's one of the benefits of our membership program. And if you'd like to know more about us, you can go to our website at QAHN.org to find out where we are, how you can connect with us, and to become a member. This is our special project called Heritage Live. It's our Reconnecting Heritage event. We've been separated for 2 years plus now. We've been separated by masks, by social anxieties, and it's just great to get together again with our heritage groups. We haven't met with a heritage fair in 2 years. And we haven't seen our friends in 2 years, so it's really nice to do that. And several of us were saying, boy, we haven't seen you in 2 years. So this is why we're doing this special event today. And over the 2 years, QAHN has picked up some mad skills in online broadcasting, thanks to our digital media specialist, Glenn Patterson.
Do what I can.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now, but...
So we've been connecting on website and Facebook and YouTube channels, but boy, there's nothing like getting together in person. So that's what we're doing today. And before we take the afternoon off, I'd like to thank our funder for this opportunity, Canadian Heritage, through their Canada Arts, Culture, Heritage, and Sports Recovery Program. And because of that program, we were able to do these special events. And we've been all over the province. And so it's really wonderful to be in the townships in Stanstead at the wonderful Colby-Curtis Museum. So let's get the afternoon underway. We have an oral history workshop, we have tours, we're going to meet some of the people from the heritage societies, and we're going to have a great afternoon. And the first person that I'd like to introduce you to is Stephanie Robert from the Colby-Curtis Museum. A round of applause. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
It's nice to meet you, and we're delighted to be here at the Colby-Curtis Museum. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about it, because we're sitting in this beautiful parlor space, and for people who have never been here, or even for people who are just local, they might not know what this museum is all about.
Well, first, the Stanstead Historical Society started in 1929 by volunteers who found that it was important to keep trace of their history, their heritage, And in the 90s, 1992, the Colby family gave this beautiful house called Carroll Croft, which means Croft comes from little farm. So it was a farm at the beginning here, and it was built in 1858 and 9. In 59, they entered here, the family. So it's Charles Carroll Colby, who was the master of the house, and his wife, Harriet, gave birth to 6 children. Only 4 live to be an adult. And you have them here. I don't know if the camera can see, but we have here is the parlor, and we have the family that's living with us. So we have Charles, we have Harriet, we have Jessie Maud Colby, who lived to be almost 97, yes. And she lived in this house here because she never had children, never married. She took care of the family, the village. She was very important for the community. And behind you, we have Abby, her elder sister. And behind the camera, you won't see him, Charles William. And at the end is Dr. John Colby. So the children took the house, lived here, and all the Colbys lived in this house until 1992 when they gave it. It's a Victorian house made of granite, Stanstead granite. It's rare you find granite in residential house. But Charles Carroll Colby and his father, Moses French Colby, when they built this house, they really wanted to make sure this is like village important. They wanted to bring culture. They wanted to bring wealth in this area, which was super important because it's on the border, and it was also a stagecoach stop in between Montreal and Boston.
When people come into the museum, what delights them the most? What do you think they're most interested in seeing?
Well, of course, everybody likes to know the under stories, but they are impressed by the hall, by the house, the grandeur of the house. And it's not a coincidence. The architecture wanted to show the splendor. The ceiling are high, the staircase, maybe you'll see it later, it's wide and beautifully made. I think that's what they want, they like. They all want to talk about the ghost.
Oh,
What?
do tell.
Well, even in town here, everybody knows there's seems to have presence in here, doors opening. Kathy, we'll talk later. She told me stories. I'm here just since a year, but I can tell that sometimes the moving sensor music starts and there's nobody, stuff like that. And so in Stanstead, whenever I go to children's group, because that's what I do. I am an animator and educator for school groups. They all talk to me about the ghost.
I think every museum should have a ghost. It's kind of a draw-in, isn't it?
Indeed, indeed.
What projects are on the horizon for the museum that you're really excited about?
Well, right now, I've been hired for that, to reach out for children. So we have a big program. It's called Stanstead Graduates. And the idea is to help the community here, because we noticed that the diplomacy level here is lower than the whole province of Quebec. So we really want to address that right away, and we're going to do programs with children every level, elementary school level. They're going to come here twice, at least, make a project and make an exhibition out of their projects where their parents and family will come and see the exhibition. Because we realize that here in the community, some people, they don't take this institution as their own. You know, for them, it's something from outside. So we really want to be back in the fabric of the community. So through the Stanstead Graduates program with the children, that's what we're aiming.
Sounds like a wonderful project. And you're right, in order to be a community museum, the community has to think that they own it, right? So
Yes.
What better way than to start with children?
Exactly.
Very well done. Thank you, Stephanie. We're going to see Stephanie in a little bit, but she is the Education and Cultural Coordinator for the Colby-Curtis Museum. And thank you so much for your time. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Well, our theme today is oral history. And what better way to kick off the event than to introduce you to two women that have had a big hand in the oral history, creation of the oral history projects in the Colby-Curtis Museum. And we have Marguerite Dunlop and Kathy Lusty Curtis, the archivist of the Colby-Curtis Museum. And welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Marguerite, I'm going to start with you because I think you've been a volunteer for a long time at the Colby-Curtis Museum, as that's what people tell me. You're part of the furniture almost.
Oh, that's nice.
But you were responsible a few years ago now, and you can tell me a little bit more about that, of getting an oral history project off the ground. And so I wanted to hear what got you started on that and how it progressed.
Okay, well, as you say, I've been in the archives for a good number of years now with Kathy. And one day, a young girl came in, and she was doing a project on dialects. And she wanted to hear some dialects from people from long ago. And we said, we don't have anything like that. So Kathy and I came up with a brilliant idea that we would do it. And we did. And for 20 years, I went around interviewing people, elderly people. I think the most difficult thing is to get them to admit that they have anything to say.
Yeah, I found that too in my own research, that they just don't think they have any interesting stories, but they do, don't they? Yeah,
absolutely. I was in a lineup for lunch one time at the 50 Plus Club, and I had given them a paper asking them if they'd be willing to do it. And a lot of people did not sign up, and I knew had stories. I'm in the lineup, and this woman starts telling me all these stories. And I said, "Did you fill out a paper?" She said, "No, I don't have anything to say." I said, "Darn, I wish I had my recorder with me right now," because she had a lot to say, a lot of interesting things to say.
And did you know who you were going to contact to start with, or was it one person telling you you should talk to this person?
Well, I think it began with Merrick, wasn't it? With Merrick, who is related to Kathy. And I made a mess of it because the first thing I had to learn was how to use the thing, how to get it onto the computer, and then how to get it onto a disk, which at my age was a very stiff learning process. But I managed to succeed. But you'll find that this one is all chopped up. But it's all there. It's just in 5 or 6 different... So it started with people Kathy knew. And then I joined the 50 Plus Club, and I got people there. And sometimes I would just be telling people about the project, and they would start telling me stories, and I'd nab them. I'd say, "Yeah, when can I see you? When can we talk about it?" And that's how I got a lot of people. I also got a lot of people who refused, unfortunately.
Oh, you found that to be a challenge, yeah?
Which is kind of annoying, because some of them had such really good stories. And now there were 4 people I had lined up, and then the COVID happened. And they've all passed away since.
Yeah, that's very sad. Yeah, was that one of your biggest challenges in your project?
The first challenge was learning how to do it. The second challenge was getting them to agree, getting people to agree. The third challenge was getting some of them to keep quiet after a while. Once I got them started, they just, and I think the most important thing an interviewer can do is listen. But when they start repeating and all of that, you have to sort of subtly, get them to say something else. I always go with a bunch of cards. I'm a great one for index cards. And I just have a big title, like ancestry, home, how did you earn your living? So if there was a dull spot, I'd just look at one of those. But to be perfectly honest, most of the time, I didn't have to flip those cards. They were going there without me telling them to.
There's sometimes a hesitancy when the microphone is right in front of you. Did you find that too?
But it's very, you've seen it. It's very, very, it's just a little small thing. I should have brought it with you to show you. I could have interviewed you and you wouldn't even know I was interviewing you.
I bet I would.
I do look at it occasionally to make sure that it's still operating, but otherwise I just pretend it's not there, and so do they.
Is there one that you comes to mind of a favorite interviewer?
You don't catch me with that way, no.
That's a political question.
No. They're all favorites. They all had something special. They all were hard workers. They all were non-complainers. They all were help out. They always help their neighbors at everything. They still do, people of that genre. They do. And they all had a sense of humor.
Has anyone ever interviewed you, Marguerite?
Yes, we were interviewed here just a little while ago.
Excellent.
They turned the microphone on you.
Yeah, exactly.
We did find a clip, Kathy. You sent this to me, or I think it was in February for another presentation. But a woman named Nellie Hudson. Just set up that clip a little bit. Tell us about her.
This story kind of stuck out because, as Marguerite said, they all were so humorous in times. And this lady, it was just during the war, and she was connected to a soldier and writing to him. And the soldier had a friend, and he said, well, I'm going to go home and marry her. Long story short, he did. But Nellie's dad didn't approve. So Nellie and her soldier, when he came home, they ran away, and she explains all how they went and eloped. And it just really stuck out in my mind. It was a great clip.
Let's listen to it.
They got a beautiful old organ in there, pipe organ.
Were you married in that church?
Let's see, I ran away and got married.
Oh, dear. You were running away from the other fiancé. No kidding.
I went to Waterloo and got married in Waterloo
You didn't want a
by
big
the
wedding?
Reverend Mitchell.
Oh, okay.
Did you ever hear of him?
No, should I have?
Yes, because the Mitchells were in Magog at one time at the United Church.
Okay.
Yeah, I was married in the United Church. Yeah.
So why did you run away? You didn't want a big wedding?
Well, because my father didn't want me to go out with Herb. He wanted me to wait for Carl.
Okay.
And so I was 22. So I figured I had a mind of my own. I'd marry who I wanted.
I bet you had a mind of your own all the way along from the age of 6 or 7, yeah.
So anyway, we ran away to. I was working in the office at Dominion Textile at the time,
Okay.
and so this Saturday morning, I took the little train from Magog to Foster, then from Foster to Waterloo, and my cousin was living in Waterloo at the time, and so I went to her house, and Herb met me there, and we got to the Reverend Mitchell to come over and
Wow.
and marry us in the house.
Well, it worked out, right?
Then we spent our honeymoon in the Waterloo Hotel, the old hotel.
You didn't go very far,
No,
then, eh?
we didn't.
There you go.
That's
Lovely.
marvelous.
It was so cute, and after listening to there was 21 oral histories that I listened to find clips for the expo, and everybody caught me with something. Everybody had a piece that just either made you giggle, gave you tears, or you could connect to. You could just close your eyes and sort of picture it all.
So you've mentioned the expo. So that's a great segue into what's happening upstairs. It's called Let Me Tell You a Story. Wonderful title. So how did that get started? What was the spark that got that going?
Well, our director, Samuel, he came to us and said that this is the idea for the next exposition. We're going to do something with the oral histories that you've always wanted to do something with. So my job was to listen to them all, take notes, and try to find clips of how they lived, how they traveled, and I had different themes to look for. And of course, many of these people lived through the war. And we have one gentleman that caught my heart, and they're all very good and all very special, but Alan Bullock was a prisoner of war. And he, you could just close your eyes, and he describes everything so well. It was like a movie in your head, and his family has been so generous. They have donated for us to use his medals and photographs and different things. So he's one about the war that just really caught my heart.
That's an immense job, though, to listen to all the tapes. Did you transcribe all of them too?
I transcribed pieces of it. We didn't do it all, but I did the interesting parts and marked down from when it started to the end, so that they can take pieces and you can come and, of course, listen to them here. But it was hard to cut it down because there's so many interesting parts. And I mean, we had Mrs. Whipple, Geraldine Whipple, was the first woman in Quebec to be licensed as a harness racer.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it's like, yeah, that's it. And I mean, a lot of these people, I know of them or knew them, and I just didn't know. And it just proves that everybody, I don't care who you are, you have a story. You don't think it's interesting, but you do have a story.
I think so too. And Marguerite, you
Absolutely.
And I had the pleasure of having a sneak peek upstairs, and we're going to go take everybody upstairs in just a moment. But to match stories with artifacts as well, that's tricky.
That was tricky, but we had Vicky came in and she did a beautiful job at the setup of the expo. I mean, I couldn't even imagine that it would come out this beautiful and so well done. And yeah, you come in and you see different artifacts and you can sit and listen to these little clips. Some of the clips are on the wall just to grab your curiosity. And yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful project. It's one of the things that I was involved in, I'm most proud of here.
I think it's a very inspirational because a lot of historical societies have boxes full of tapes and, you know, the old reel tapes and the 8-track tapes and that sort of thing, but they don't know what to do with them. And they just sit in boxes. Sometimes they're transcribed, but most of the times they're not. And so this is so wonderful that you've actually taken tapes and made them alive again. The voices are resonating out into the community again. What a great idea.
And one of the things we realize is, oh my, we really, really have to do more of this. Many of the people that we already have passed away, but we have their story. And we really have to expand on it and do more. It's very important.
And Marguerite, you said 50 plus, and you're right. We tend to think oral history has to be done with very elderly people, but you know, it's 50, 40s. A lot of people have stories even from, you know, if they're that young, right?
If I may, though, also I was becoming interested in people who moved here afterwards. There was one elderly woman, she's Dutch, she's passed away since, but she didn't want to do it because she said, oh, I wasn't born here, I didn't grow up here. I said, but I need your story about how you adapted to moving from Holland to this area. How were you accepted? You know, all the different questions you can ask somebody with that experience.
Are you up to doing some more interviews?
I think I am, but I'm of an age now where I should be a subject, not the author.
Thank you both so much. It's really wonderful. And if you haven't seen it yet, it's just so worth the visit. And to our Facebook audience as well, it's just a marvelous exhibit and what you can do with oral history, even in your own families. And so you don't just have these tapes sitting in a computer or in a box. This is a really great way to use them. So thank you very much to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to do something pretty high tech.
High risk.
High risk. Glenn is going to, with Stephanie Robert and Callista Photo, is going to go on a special tour of the Let Me Tell You a Story exhibit.
Let's see. Let me just test these wireless mics quickly. Test. Alrighty. Test. I think we're good.
Okay. Do you want people to follow you, or do you want
If they want, it is upstairs, so you can follow behind if you like. But I realize it's not everyone would want to go upstairs. It'll be about 10 minutes, and in the meantime, you guys are welcome to chat down here.
grab a coffee?
And have a look at the kiosk.
Yeah, have a look at the kiosks in the back.
That's great.
Yeah, use the washroom.
Our folks who have come today from across the townships, that would be great.
All right, Thomas.
Coffee also in the sunroom.
So the stream has just stopped completely, but it's recording. I'm going to post the recording later. But yeah. All right. Stephanie Robert. Here's your microphone.
Yeah, thank you. So like
Thanks for
this.
doing this, Stephanie.
Thank you. Oh, so now it's rolling?
It's rolling.
Oh, so follow me. I'll present you my co-animator,
Okay.
Callista Photo. She's a guide here.
Okay.
And she's wearing a mask because there's a disease in her family, but she has a beautiful face. It's too bad you don't
sure.
see. So let's go upstairs
Yeah, let's
now.
go upstairs. I'll follow you too.
Follow me. Yes. Be careful of the uneven step.
That one got me last night.
Oh, last night, that's the aim. I call it the Victorian era alarm system. It was made for that, so that if somebody comes in the house without knowing the house, you'll trip on the uneven stairs. I don't know if it worked. So we're here upstairs where we have the temporary exhibition called Let Me Tell You a Story.
Okay.
There's 3 parts because you heard, I'm sorry, I climbed the stairs. I'm a bit.
Me too.
Sorry. You heard Kathy and Marguerite talking, so they listened to all the oral history, and we divided by themes. There's 3 big themes coming out of that, and I'll present 2 of them, and Calista will present the 3rd.
Okay, perfect.
So the first, come with me. Oh, when you come in here, you smell the hay, and it's too bad the people online don't smell it. It's really sweet. And why? Well, here it's called modes of living. And it's how did we work, live, eat before electricity and telecommunication and everything we have right now. So we have, of course, snowshoes. People here in the area would work a lot on the land. So farmers, and of course sugaring was very important every year. What else we have? We have behind you beautiful everyday objects. Ironing, before electricity. That's one of the smallest, but we have some that are very, very heavy. Camera. There's the brownie, I don't know if you can see it, yeah? The brownie camera.
We're on.
Okay. Well, welcome back. That was a fabulous tour we just had up in the Let Me Tell You It's a Story exhibit. And now we're going to meet some of the representatives from the historical societies that are located in the Eastern Townships. There's quite a buzz going on in the background because we are having a heritage fair at the same time. And the heritage groups are here with their tables, their kiosks, showing us their books and their pamphlets and telling us all about the work that they do. So let's meet some of the folks that are the representatives in the heritage groups. And the first person I'm going to introduce you to is Ed Patterson.
Peterson.
Peterson, okay. Yes, please, have a seat in the hot seat, Ed. And Ed is representing the Bury Historical and Heritage Society. And welcome.
Thank you very much, Heather.
I wonder, Ed, first tell us where you're located and tell us how the Historical Society got started.
We are located in the geographical center of the Eastern Townships. And the Historical Society, which is actually a bilingual group, was formed in 2002 in a project to save the original town hall, which was very controversial at the time, but it came off. I was not an active member at that time. I was a member, but the stories, there could be a lot of stories for you just in that project. And this year we're celebrating our 20th anniversary.
Very good. And you started with a small group of people with that one project in mind?
It started with 3 women. And all 3 women are still alive, and some of them are still active. We are very proud of the movement that grew from that, and they got, I believe, over 200 memberships within the 3-year campaign.
That's amazing in a small community to have.
Yes.
That means you have the support of the community behind you, I would think.
At that time, the community was almost evenly divided, for and against, though. So it was a divisive project, but it's a project now which has come to full cycle. And in fact, the town has moved its offices out of that building again, and it has given the building over, not propertyship, but use of the building to all of the community groups. And so the Bury Historical Society now has a brick and mortar home. So we just moved in this summer.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does that mean you now have, you're going to be creating a collection? You already have a collection, or you're going to be expanding one?
My friend John Mackley, who I think you know, has already decorated the walls, and he's put a display cabinet. It's become a welcoming place in a matter of months. And
Well done.
We're trying to get our archives installed, which are mainly written at this point.
So like a paper documentation.
That's correct. Yes.
Very good. What are your big plans for the future?
Well, it's funny you should ask. We did not rehearse this. We're planning a major conference for 2023, and it has 3 aspects to it. We're going to, with the help, some help from QAHN and from the Caisse des Jardins and from also the town of Bury, I hope. We will mount exhibitions throughout 2023. Starting in March with an exterior display of the military history of the town, and then later on in the summer we're going to have an inside exhibition of different materials and artifacts from the military history. And then the date is escaping me at the moment, but I believe it's the 3rd Saturday in October. We're going to have a full day's conference and a mess dinner.
Oh, fantastic. Like a military dinner.
Yes, exactly. So the planning has already started, but we've got a ways to go.
No, it's wonderful. I know this project is from the Belonging and Identity in English-Speaking Quebec project, which is sponsored by QAHN, and also the Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécoises d'expression anglaise. And so this pocket of funding was distributed to a variety of English-oriented historical societies that reflect English history, English-speaking history. And the Bury Historical and Heritage Society was fortunate enough to receive one of the grants. So it's well done. Yeah, it's
Very grateful.
no, it's going to be a wonderful project. We're excited to see what you're going to do. And it just shows what a small historical society can do when they have the right combination of people and energy and a bit of funding.
Yes, and I would just like to say that today I have been really inspired by what I've seen upstairs and what I've heard so far from the Stanstead group.
Yeah, it is really marvelous, isn't it? So, and we're so glad you came, Ed, and thank you very much for representing your group. It's wonderful. Thank you very much, Ed.
Good to have you, Ed. Thank you.
you. Our next guest is going to be Judy Bachelder from the Georgeville Historical Society. Welcome, Judy. The hot seat is open. No, Judy, the name suggests you're located in Georgeville, but for the folks that don't know actually where the townships are, where is Georgeville?
Well, Georgeville is about 15 kilometers south of Magog, right on the lake, on Lake Memphremagog, Magog, and it's been there for many years. 1797 is when it originated.
Was it settled by loyalists at first?
No loyalists. People just coming to look for free land.
See, that's an interesting, that surprises me because we just assume in the townships, it was settled all by loyalists, but not Georgeville.
No loyalists, no.
And when was the Historical Society started?
We started in 1991. I suspect the reason for starting it was that we were having the bicentennial in 1997. And I think this was the preparation for it. Anyway, it's still going strong. We have our few problems, but still going strong.
Well, I don't know any historical society that doesn't have problems, right? But are you in a location? You're in the midst of a move, I understand.
Right. We had a location for 6 years, and now we're looking for another location. Actually, we started out with a location just below where we are now, and we had to leave, and we were packed up in boxes for maybe 15 years. So we've had this location for 6 years, and we're back into boxes again.
Oh, Judy, that's tough.
Well, we're not quite as bad as we were before. We do have space at the community hall, so I'll be able to continue doing some research, and we'll have some computers and scanners and equipment there. We'll be able to continue.
Well, that's good. That's good to know because I'm sure people who are looking for genealogy or history of the townships would be interested in knowing how to contact you.
Well, sometimes they find us on our website, and they can get in touch with us that way. That's normally the way they get in touch with us. But I'm also at I'll be at the Founders Room at the Community Hall on Tuesday afternoons and Saturday afternoons. And anybody that would like to stop by and see me, I would love to see them.
If you had to pick something from your collection that stands out in your mind, yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot. What is something that's quite precious to the Historical Society?
That's really a hard one.
Is it? Do you have like founding members' documents or letters or?
Oh, yes, we have a lot of 2 filing cabinets full of information, mostly thanks to John Scott and John Boynton. Neither one are with us any longer, unfortunately, but they did so much research, and we're so grateful to them. And now we have younger people who are still doing research, and it's growing.
That's wonderful to hear because our historical societies really do need younger people to take hold of our history and to move it forward. So,
Yeah.
and well done.
It seems that people are not interested in history until they're 50 or 60 years old, and then they're too old to do it.
Well, we do have Keith sent me a clip. It was an excerpt of, because you guys did a recent oral history project, and I know the person that directed it was under 50. Can you just tell us a little bit about that project? Then I'll play the clip after.
All right. Well, Ariane is fantastic. She's 20 now, but she started with us a year previous. She was getting credits at Queen's University to work with us for the summer. And then last year we got a grant and we were able to hire her. And so she did 3 interviews. The first one was with Maureen Atkin Cameron, who was reading stories that her mother wrote. And her mother was a very interesting lady, and the stories are quite entertaining.
And you brought this picture here I just put
Yes.
up. Just tell us a little bit about this picture, and then I'll play the clip.
Let's see. All right, Addie is at the top. That's Maureen's mother. And the person at the bottom is Addie's father, so Maureen's grandfather.
Very good. And Glenn will play the clip, and I'll prop that back up so
right,
we
let's
can
have a
get a
listen
view
here.
of it. Okay.
And then this one is taken from another lot of notes from my mother's many notebooks. And it is about a fire in the village, and the date is about April the 11th, 1973. Fire in the village. The sky was clear, but it seemed damp, and I was tired, so I went to bed early. I was awakened by Jack, who said, "Addie, there's a big fire in the village." And the time was 4:30 a.m. I got up and looked out the bedroom window, and there was a fire over in what was the Sanford property, and then it belonged to a Mr. Schooler, and now is owned by Goulding Lambert. And from that time, I went to bed, and from the time that I awakened, 12 inches of wet snow had fallen. The power was off, the lights were out, and the raging fire illuminated the village, and it was a weird sight. We dressed. I had on a red nightie, so I put on some ski pants, sweater, toque, and gloves and overshoes and went out. Carmen was up. Jack went around the village in his old truck blowing his horn. I rapped on doors. Ernie the storekeeper didn't waken. Neither did the bachelors. Claude Thayer came walking down the hill.
I had
Oh my
to put a fade
goodness.
out somewhere. But just as they mentioned the Bachelors. Sorry, no disrespect.
And we just slept right through it.
So you remember that too?
No, I don't remember it, but
Okay.
obviously we slept through it.
That's an amazing story, though. How wonderful. It's so clear and
Yeah, great. You really did a great job. And there's,
Good. Ariane will be pleased to hear that.
I'm glad.
She's in Scotland on a scholarship right now, so
Too bad she couldn't be with us.
yes.
But I'm sure she could have shared some insights and wisdom with us.
I'm sure she could have, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Judy, thank you so much. And from the Georgeville Historical Society, thank you, Judy. Next, we have Wendy Durant from the Lennoxville Ascot Historical and Museum Society. Your chair awaits, Wendy. Where is Lennoxville today, for the folks that don't know?
Lennoxville, the borough of Lennoxville, is now part of Sherbrooke. And the Historical Society is located on Speed Street, sort of in the center of town. And we're on the second floor of Uplands, which used to belong to the Speed family.
Yeah, and Uplands is a house very similar to the Colby-Curtis house in its grandeur, isn't it?
Yes, yes. You've probably heard of Tea Time at Uplands. And this has been very fortunate for the Historical Society because Tea Time at Uplands is a very popular destination, and where it's affiliated with, well, it's publicized by Destination Sherbrooke. So there are a lot of people who come to the tea, and then, thanks to our guides, they come upstairs and they visit the museum. And we have a lot of Francophone visitors who are just discovering tea time and also the rich heritage that we have upstairs.
The tea itself is marvelous because it's done in that Victorian style, isn't it? What can people expect?
Well, they can expect cucumber sandwiches and scones and homemade jam, cottage cream, and it's so popular that now you have to reserve online because after COVID, it sort of opened the floodgates and people at Uplands were just swamped with calls. So
It's marvelous. What a marvelous idea, though, as a fundraiser for the Historical Society, but also doing something that's very historic, too. Yeah.
yes, Yes, we've had questions just recently. Of course, Prince Philip came in the early 1970s, and our president at the time, Muriel Brand, took him around the building, and he was quite interested, and he had quite some cryptic comments to make too, as was his nature. But
Well, you could still advertise it as Prince Philip gave his thumbs up, you know? What projects are going on at Uplands right now? Do you have an exhibit?
yes, it's unfortunate that Janice Fraser isn't here because she could elaborate on what's there. But it's traditional townships crafts, and there's a variety of things that needlepoint, and there's an interesting tool chest made out of wood and a variety of tools made out of wood. The one thing that I find interesting too, there's an Aboriginal fan. It looks like it's a feather, and I don't know if it's Abenaki or not, but that's the one thing of all the things that I find quite interesting.
Is it from your own collection, or were they?
Yes, they're all from our collection.
It's marvelous to put things out that people haven't seen before. So, and to come up with new ideas you do it every season, right?
Well, I think this one's going to go on for a year or two. And you were asking about projects. What we've been working on is we've been working on plaques, updating the plaques and updating information on the plaques that we have around. There's two outside the Milby Church. There's one outside, the Uplands building, and there are several. Excuse me. So
Are the updating meaning bringing in new information, and they're bilingual? And sorry. That's good.
yeah.
And that's the main focus of the society at the moment. Yeah, very good. Oh, thank you, Wendy. It's been wonderful, and
Wendy.
it's in Lennoxville, which is part of Sherbrooke, and it's the Uplands Cultural Center. But you're located upstairs in a wonderful building, second floor. Thank you, Wendy. Now, the next person we have is Rachel Lamby from the Lac-Brome Museum. Welcome, Rachel.
Sit in nice and close if you can.
Yeah,
Heather
that
won't
would
have
be
to reach.
great. Thank you.
No problem.
Now, again, I start off with the same question because there's people watching that don't know the townships, but where is the Lac-Brome Museum?
So we're located in Knowlton, which is a part of the town of Lac-Brome.
And you've been there a long time, I think?
Oh yes, we were founded in 1897, so we're in our 125th year, and the museum's been open since the early 1900s.
Have you done anything special to commemorate this 125th anniversary? I mean, that's astounding for an historical society.
We've been working hard to make sure that it's commemorated as it should be. So we've done a little exhibit that we displayed at the fair, and we've brought it here with us today. But I was hoping that we were going to do something bigger as the year goes on.
Well, that's good. I mean, we're in sort of the post-COVID years, so it's been hard to sort of get the societies up and running and getting people to know that the staff are working, the lights are on in museums, and that's one of the reasons why we're here today. But your museum is fabulous, and you have a wonderful collection. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Oh, sure. So we collect the history of Brome County, which was founded in part by Loyalists. So we go from sort of the Indigenous roots and the Loyalist history all the way up to the present day. We have a large military collection. We have a toy collection and a children's museum. And really, the more I talk, the more there is. So.
It's true, and your children's museum is really fabulous. So if you're families with young children and you want to introduce them to museums, the Lac-Brome Museum is a great place to take them. If you haven't been before, it's a really marvelous place. You have a unique military collection, like you said. Are there objects in the collection that really stand out for you?
Well, so the obvious one is our Fokker D7 biplane, which was donated to the museum in just after the Second World War, and it's a war trophy. But there are always, for me, it's the artifacts that have a lot of story to them, not just necessarily the big ticket items as we as we say. So there's a rocking horse that's up in the second floor of the academy, which, if you don't know the story behind it, it just seems a little innocuous, but it belonged to a young boy named Bertie Tarbell, who died, unfortunately, around the age of 3. But the whole Victorian room that's been built around this exhibit has parts of his story and parts of his history in it. So we have a painting with the rocking horse in it, and there's a hair wreath on the wall that was donated by his family. And it's kind of like a sweater. The more you pull on the string, the more it comes. So that one always sort of hits me as
That's precious. That's amazing. What's on the horizon for your next year? Do you know yet, and what's happening?
So we do have a plan. This year, up until April, we have our Abenaki exhibit, which is called Present and Past, the Wabanaki Presence in Brum County. And that's being presented in conjunction with the Musée des Abenaki and with Christine Siwi Wawana-Loath, who is an Abenaki artist. So we're very, very fortunate to have that. And then in May, we're going to have an exhibit that's not yet named, but it's about the British home children, and especially the Knowlton Distributing House, because there were 5,000 children who came through Knowlton, and almost 10% of the Canadian population is descended from a home child. So it's really it's an important story for the area, and it's really an important story for us.
Yeah, that's marvelous. They just celebrated the Home Child Day, I believe. September 28th is the date of recognition for the home children. And yet that's true. It's a very important part of the story, especially of Knowlton in that time period. So it's marvelous the museum is going to be doing something to recognize that. So well done. Yeah. Rachel, thank you very much for your time here today. Again, the Lac-Brome Museum in Knowlton, Quebec, a marvelous place to go, and it's more than one building, isn't it?
Oh yes, we have about 8 buildings in total. And the permanent exhibit, unfortunately, isn't open during the winter, but the temporary exhibit and the Children's Museum are open all winter, and we'll be happy to see you.
Yep, and check them out online. They've got a good website too. So thank you very much, Rachel. Now, someone has to go and find Jody Robinson from the Eastern Townships Resource Center because she is next. And I've delayed bringing her up here, even though she was first on the list. So,
what does QAHN have coming up?
And QAHN also, we need Matthew Farfan, the executive director from QAHN, and they're busy chit-chatting in the back, I think, with coffee and whatnot. But you realize just by talking to the people that we have so far, how rich the townships is with historical societies and the history that they have. And here we have Jody Robinson from the Eastern Townships Resource Center. Hi, Jody.
Hi.
Jody's the archivist. But Jody, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the ETRC.
Yeah, so the ETRC, we're situated on campus at Bishop's University in Sherbrooke. And we're a nonprofit organization, but we have, of course, strong links with the university. And they kindly let us use space there. And so our mandate for the archives anyway, the archives department, is for the preservation of the English-speaking communities of the Eastern Townships. This is all, so we cover from Missisquoi Bay up to Drummondville and Victoriaville, very close to Saint-Georges-de-Beauce, of the historical Eastern Township. So we have a little bit from all over. It means that we don't specialize in one specific county or township or town, but we have various types of material. We have diaries and photographs and maps and letters and postcards, as well as account ledgers, so all kinds of things that speak to the heritage of the English-speaking communities in the townships, as well as some French-speaking communities, because there are some areas that fall outside of any other historical society's mandates. So, for instance, we have a lot that relates to East Angus, which is more of a French-speaking community there, but we have a lot of material from places like that. So it's not just English material, but that's our key focus.
And you're connected to all the historical societies too. virtually, I guess, digitally through something called the portal, right?
Yeah, so in 2016, we launched what's called the Eastern Townships Archives Portal. And it's a multi-repository or multi-institutional online archives catalog. So a finding aid, also sometimes we call it an online database. And so the ETRC, along with about 9 other members, use that as a way to make archives and our history available to the public from their homes. So you can go on and search, what images we might have from, any like Bedford, for example, or any other place, or Sherbrooke or Lennoxville, and that way you can see what a bunch of different historical societies have all at the same time. So you don't have to go from one website to another website. You can also see, and view photographs that have been digitized or maps. We also have a couple oral histories that have been on because it supports audio, and a couple of videos. One of Barbara Verity's documentary on covered bridges that she did in the 1970s. We recently put that up. So it's just a nice way to bring all of us together, and a way to bring the history to people, into people's homes a bit easier.
And if we are trying to do our own genealogy, is it a good idea to start with you? And then you can always start with Jody.
Is it a good idea? I don't know. But you can certainly start with me if you're looking into your family genealogy. I can see what we have, what resources that we have, and point you in other directions, because there's also a lot online too. The other day I was sitting down with a researcher, and we were kind of doing a little walkthrough of how to use notarial records, how to find the land records. A lot of them are digitized online through Bibliothèque Archives Nationales du Québec, the provincial archives website, but navigating it is a little bit tricky if you're not familiar with it. So, and then if I can't help, I send them off, even if I can help a little bit, I always send them off to Missisquoi or Brome or Lambs or Richmond or Barrie or Georgeville, or whoever is most relevant.
Is it easier to come and find you on campus? Is that the best way to, if you were going to suggest to someone, come and do some research at the ETRC, what's the best route?
Well, right now, really, it's always best to make an appointment. So first step is to get in touch with me either by email or by phone. Very quick to reply in most cases, and it's not hard to make an appointment. We can typically arrange something that week, but searching me out, it's a bit hard to find me on campus right now. I'm mostly I live my life as a basement rat, but so that isn't always obvious, and I split my time between 2 offices. But if you get in touch with me in advance, I can make sure that, one, we're not wasting your time, that we have stuff that's going to be interesting for the research that you're doing, and then also I can give you really good instructions on how to find me.
Okay. Judy, thank you so much for your time, and Eastern Townships Resource Center. It's a great place. Thank you very much.
Jody, thank you.
Yeah. And last up, we have Matthew Farfam, the Executive Director of the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. And Matthew, there's always something happening at QAHN, isn't there?
Yes, there is, Heather.
Tell us what's going on, and any projects in the horizon.
Well, we should talk about our brand new publication, which some of you may have seen online or in person. It's called Meet the Network. And basically, it's all about our member institutions from all across the townships, of course, where we are today, but all across Quebec as well. So I think there's 60 or 70 different small museums and historical societies, archives. Most of our member institutions are in here. So it's a lot of fun. These are short profiles of each one, the kinds of activities they're doing. So it's very readable, and it's been written by many different contributors, and some of them are here today. So it's really been a fun project. So.
Yeah, it's very diverse too, the different groups and the focus that they give, and the projects that they're doing. It's really marvelous.
Right. Well, we're trying our best to help promote our membership. That's what we're all about, is as a network, which we call ourselves the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. most or all of our institutional members are connected in some way to the Anglophone community of Quebec. It's part of their mission, or maybe the building they're in, like this one, the Colby House. Long roots connected to the Eastern Townships English-speaking community. It may not be the only thing that they're interested in, of course, their local history societies, but it's part of their mission. So that's really what our membership is about.
Where can people find this?
They can find it by reaching out to us by email if they like. It's home@QAHN.org. It's only $20, so it's a bargain.
And Christmas is coming, folks, so what else do you have?
Well, this is a fun project which we did. This is kind of one of our main COVID projects. It's called Historical Views. It's a box set of 2 books. Now, our magazine is called Quebec Heritage News, and anyone who is a member of the network receives that. This is an anthology of some of the really good articles that have been in the magazine over the past 20 years. This was a 20th anniversary project. It came out 2021. It's done really well. It's been very popular since it came out. It's a limited print run, but there are still a few left. If anyone's interested in local history, it's a lot of fun. It's interesting. They're very readable. The magazine is very readable. It's popular history, and it's people love it. The magazine circulates. You've been writing for it for years, and Glenn, you've contributed. It circulates. The readership is very loyal, and it's fun. It's a great publication.
And this is a beautiful book selection, and it has gorgeous pictures in it, and very well written by the network. Again, people in the network. So and well done. It's
been a labor of love. We've found ourselves in kind of the print publishing business. It's a little counterintuitive with the internet and the growth of online history sites. People still enjoy a book, and it's very refreshing. Print is still alive and well, and we love it, and it's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Very well done.
I wonder if we could actually snag Grant Myers for a short. Grant, do you want to come up just for a bit?
He has a deer in headlights look at the moment.
Is it optional?
No. Now that we've announced you.
Now we're going to be all shy.
Oh, you're good. I'll ask the questions. I was chatting with Grant a bit before. Grant, I was wondering. Grant is our president at QAHN, and he's also been. The theme of today is oral history interviews, and you took your own initiative recently, starting a podcast. Can you tell us how that idea came about, what inspired you, and what sort of materials you've been working with?
I want to be clear, I haven't launched the podcast yet.
I know.
But I have 3 interviews. One is complete, and I have another 2 to process, and I'm hoping to launch it this winter. It has a very unoriginal name called Quebec Voices. But really what it is about the experience of history. So people that have witnessed history, or people that produce history. And so what their relationship is with that. So that's kind of the twist. It's not about the history per se, but it's about the individual's relationship with the experience of history.
It's a fascinating subject. We often overlook that. We assume history is kind of impartial, but
Right.
and it just comes from the ether. But it really is. There's a unique perspective behind each story that's told in our history.
Well, that's it, right? And we produce it. We either produce it personally or we produce it publicly. And my father was a police officer, right? And he said he'd go to the scene of a crime, and he'd ask about the perpetrator who had fled. And he said, well, what color shirt were they wearing, right? And he'd get 3 different answers, right? Well, history's a bit like that. We all perceive it differently, and we all experience it differently. And I think it's really important that we're able to, at a personal level, whether it be private or public, share our experiences of history. And just one other aspect to it as well. The focus is really on minorities within Quebec. So and not to take anything away from the majority community, but I do think it's our responsibility for those of us that are minorities, whether linguistic, visible, or otherwise, to share our experiences and to produce our perspectives about what history in Quebec means to us.
Yeah. We were talking before we started today. This was sort of your first experience trying to record audio and everything. Just give people maybe who are curious about doing something similar but have never worked with that, like how have your experiences been launching into this?
Well, it's funny you should say. So the first thing I went out and did is I went to and bought, a podcast kit from a well-known audio company, right? And then I realized, well, I should upgrade this and I should upgrade that, and that's not quite what I needed. So I kind of jumped in with both feet with very little research, and then went and upgraded from there. The trickiest thing is just getting good quality audio, and but I haven't worried about that too much, right? As long as I can produce audio that's legible, people can understand, and I can edit it in a way that it's compelling, I think I'll only improve. So I'm not expecting to be 100% out of the gate, but it really is. And that's what I'd recommend. Don't spend a lot of time kind of just thinking about it. Jump right in and learn by doing.
Agreed. Press the record button.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. And you'll get better.
Yeah, you definitely do. You definitely. Thanks so much. That's going to tie in so nicely to our workshop coming up.
Beautifully.
Actually. Yeah.
Thank you, Grant.
So I think what we'll do, let's take a little pause for a couple minutes. Okay. I'll put on a timer. If anyone's watching it online, our internet connection's been very unstable here today, unlike yesterday when we tested all this. But we're recording it, so if it's been glitchy, there will be a recording in the coming days, probably by the end of next week at the latest. So anyways, let's come back in 6 minutes, and I'll put on some hold music for the people listening online.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
All right, we'll see you guys back in a bit.
Mics are off now.
Well, should I introduce myself? Or
No, I've got it. I'm on it. Well, welcome back, everyone. We have a really cool workshop ready for you this afternoon. Glenn Patterson has been QAHN's digital media specialist for the last 2 years, helping the organization increase their content and programming on digital platforms like Facebook, YouTube, Zoom. He's also a PhD candidate in ethnomusicology. I almost said museology because I'm just used to that. Musicology at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland, where he received rigorous training in ethnographic interviewing and audio documentary production as part of his coursework. In his PhD fieldwork and project work for QAHN, he has produced over 100 interviews with English-speaking Quebecers from the Gaspé to Western Quebec, mostly focused on their local musical cultures. In 2013, he contributed to QAHN's StoryNet project with a series of oral histories with musicians across the province, work that's accumulated in 2 audio documentaries. He furthered this work as a project director for QAHN's 2019-2020 musical heritage project entitled A Different Tune, which featured dozens more oral history interviews, digitization of analog home recordings, and a 16-part online concert and workshop series. In his work, he's driven by the very human connections that develop when we lend a close ear to people who have a story to tell about themselves and their communities. So please welcome Glenn Patterson.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I'm wearing many hats at the same time. I apologize if I'm a little all over the map, but the topic today and the whole theme of our afternoon's been oral history, as you know. I want to start with a quick poll. How many people here have worked in some way or other with oral history? I think that's about half the room, maybe just more than half. How many here have conducted an interview themselves? That's a smaller minority. How many have worked the technology while they were doing that interview? Yeah, I guess a notebook is also a technology. Great. And so it's not mandatory, but I asked people who were interested in this workshop, if they wanted to bring any of their recorders or microphones. Did anyone bring that? I see Ed's got his, and we got some lapel mics over there from Georgeville. Perfect. Perfect. This is great. This is a good representation of what tends to get used for oral histories. So I'm really excited about that. So the focus of this workshop is we're going to start with a little bit of theory about oral history and interviewing, but it's going to be a lot more about practice. This is the practice of how to listen in an oral history interview, the practice of how to ask compelling questions. Another thing I think is very important is making yourself and your interviewee comfortable. Also getting comfortable with the recording technology that we use, which, as we know, can make people, including our interviewees, uncomfortable, and ourselves, let's be honest. So I think why I organized it this way is I think when we combine these practices, they work together to help us get more compelling responses from our interviewee, and I think they can also help us deepen our relationship with the interviewee. Sometimes they're complete strangers, sometimes we know them only a little bit, but I find oral history interview, you really do, there's something very precious about it, and it deepens a bond very quickly, especially if you can make them feel comfortable. And it's not that hard. I hope I can help you. So I think the other thing that these practices will do is they'll help us get what radio producers call good tape. And so that means, I would say that's recorded audio that's a joy to listen to. It's a combination of compelling narratives, but it's also captured with strong, clear audio. And so we've heard some insights on what you guys have done in your oral history and your approaches. The intent is not to say don't do it like that or whatever, but it's just to push you, it's to give you some ideas to push you in a direction. You can take what I say with a grain of salt, but I would consider trying it. Think about some of these things, but I've noticed myself in radio producers I've talked to and oral historians, there are sort of a set of shared kind of practices that we use to get compelling audio and really rich narrative. So this workshop is all about audio, which I realize is a bit ironic because I'm surrounded by video cameras and I'm running a switcher and all that. And it's actually, it's very nerve-wracking. But audio, it's a safe harbor. So, most of us have phones now that can take quite good videos with the click of a button. More and more content is available online in video formats, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. And I've also noticed an increasing expectation that oral history projects will be done in video rather than simply audio, which is the way it was probably until the 1990s, early 2000s. Indeed, several of you who wrote me in advance of this workshop, you told me about recent projects you've done and how you recorded in video and how you did that. So why just focus on audio? Okay, first, it's more accessible for beginners. It's cheaper and easier to get great audio than great video. Audio also allows us to really focus on the narrative and storytelling dimensions rather than worrying about the visuals, lighting, all that other stuff. Even if you would like to incorporate video at some point, I think we should heed the old filmmaker's adage that audio is half of video. I'll maybe rephrase this mathematically. So great video footage plus bad audio equals a bad video. We're much less inclined to continue watching great footage if the audio is terrible. However, if the video is a bit lackluster but the audio is great, most viewers will be somewhat forgiving and stick with the program. Ira Glass, he works for NPR, he's the producer of This American Life. He's often quoted as saying, audio is the most visual of the storytelling media. Think about that for a second. So, he's basically claiming that audio is more visual than video. He's being provocative, but I think there is some truth in that. When you listen to a great podcast or a great audio documentary, it pulls you in. There's a renowned U.S. television and radio journalist, Robert Krulwich, and here's what he says. He says, when radio is produced well, the listener becomes a co-author. And I think this applies beyond just radio to any audio where the focus is on voices that narrate a story or a perspective. So what I want to encourage each of you to do who are interested in oral history and developing your oral history practice is just take some time in the following weeks to get a handle on getting great audio, or even just better audio. You can email me, we can chat on Zoom sometime privately, we can talk in person right after this workshop if you're looking for more direction. And again, even if you do aspire to incorporate video at some point, I really want to suggest get to a place where your audio content is so good that you don't even necessarily need the video. Okay, so I want to take you guys back to the beginning of my oral history journey, and I started I was just passionate about the subject matter. I had no training or anything. I found, like Heather said, these the stories of English-speaking Quebecers were often very fascinating, and they weren't well known. Stuff about their expressive culture in particular. For me, it was music. So we're going to listen to 2 interviews, and I've chosen them for you to, after we listen to both of them, I want you to just maybe give some brief feedback on how it felt to listen to the 2. What sort of the different qualities between the 2. The only thing I don't want you to focus on is the length. The first clip is very short. The second clip is 3 minutes. There's a reason for that as well, which we'll discover later. But yeah, let's just have a listen. The first one is with a gentleman actually died this summer. He grew up in Gaspé. He was a fiddle player, but we were talking about him cod fishing with his dad growing up.
Our Snowman had a store, Gary's father had a store.
Oh, yeah?
Buy our stuff there. And
Okay.
we'd take it to the boat, and I'd walk up to the post out of the young fellow.
I know it's a bit quiet.
Yeah.
And just
That's
around
okay.
dusk, we'd hit out.
That's the thing.
Put out our herring nets for bait for cod.
Okay, herring was the bait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put out the nets and go to bed. And then
Okay.
maybe 3 o'clock in the morning and get up and pull in the nets.
And what kind of sleeping did you have on the boat?
We
Was it
had,
just little cots or?
We had a cut it.
Yeah.
Outlet, and there's a cook in there and 3 bunks in there.
Okay.
Okay, that was the first clip. And the next one is with Montreal country musician. He died in 2015, Bobby Hill. So let's listen to what he had to say.
Okay, yeah, I was reading your liner notes on your album Radio Days, and I'm wondering if you can tell people a bit about the Ballad of Rocket Richard, how that came about.
Oh, yeah, well, Rocket Richard, of course, was a famous personage here in French Canada. And when he was suspended by the English-speaking president of the of the National Hockey League, Clarence Campbell, for hitting a referee during a hot moment in the playoffs in Boston, it had big repercussions here in Quebec. And we were out playing in the Eastern Townships the night that the riot took place in Montreal. When the Detroit team came to Montreal to play the playoffs after Montreal had eliminated Boston, the crowd was in a very ugly mood, apparently. And when Campbell showed up at the Forum, he got booed, and some even tried to assault him, and he had to be protected by the long arm of the law, and eventually he sort of fled. And after the game, the crowd went out into the streets, and this Montreal had never, at least while I was growing up, never seen anything like this. Smashing windows along St. Catherine Street, and absolute mayhem that the police had a hard time containing. And this was in 1955, I think St. Patrick's Day, if I'm not mistaken, 1955, after the hockey game. And we were on our way home from I had 3 musicians in the car with me who were returning from playing for a square dance somewhere in the Eastern Townships and listening to all of this on the car radio as we drove back to Montreal. And by the time we got to the Victoria Bridge, it must have been about 1 o'clock in the morning or 1:30, we decided to go take a look in the area of the forum. And so we drove over as close to the forum as we could get, but by this time the police had it all cordoned off, and we only were able to get near the forum, and we couldn't get on St. Catherine Street at all. Something told me that this was something big. And I went into a phone booth and I called Mike Wood, who was my producer at CFCF, Hometown Jamboree, and I said, Mike, are you listening? And of course, everybody in Montreal there was no television, so he had to listen to it on the radio, was glued to his radio. And I said, Mike, I think we should do a song about this. This is something extraordinary that's happening. And he said, well, have you got the song? And I said, no, but if you'll come to the radio station, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. I said, if you come to the radio station, I'll have the song by the time you get there.
That's Bobby Hill. So if you can remember back, it's 3 minutes ago, but just some impressions, like how it felt as a listener between those 2 clips. You can just blurt stuff out if you want.
But the first one, you feel you're missing something. You really don't understand, so it's frustrating. While the other one is so clear, we're just into it, and like you say, our imagination is the best viewer. That's it. We create all these images.
Ed?
I want to hear the song.
Well, I produced a documentary with that interview where I played the song. So I can send you guys the link. Yes, Jody?
I was going to say, it's nice when the interviewer doesn't interject a lot, which is hard to do because in give and take in a conversation, we have we're responding to what we're hearing, but if you're just listening to audio, it's nice. Like in the second one, you just let him tell the story.
You're stealing my thunder. It's coming up. It's okay. It's perfect. But you're exactly right.
And we could hear you better in the first one than the
I know, which is counterintuitive. So I'll talk all about why. But both interviews were recorded on this old 15-year-old recorder that just gave up the ghost a few weeks ago. Oh. And I'm really sad. I'm really attached to it. But there's a lesson in that too. So we'll talk all about that. But really, the difference between the 2 interviews is that I got some training. And things I wouldn't have thought of, So, some of them are obvious, and like Jody pointed out, some of them right there, and agreed, it is. And like you said, Stephanie, it's so much, it's nicer. You feel like you're there. Bobby's pulling you in, and you can listen to him for 3 minutes because it's compelling and because it sounds rich. There's a bunch of stuff going on there. So we're going to talk about all those sort of dimensions.
Yeah, the first thing I noticed in the first clip is the ticking. Like, that's what grabs me, and I just hear the ticking.
I know. Yeah. So.
The second one, every time he came to a halt, it was great that you didn't jump in, because our tendency is to go, and then, or something like that.
Exactly. Or here's the next question, or
and just letting him go, because he did halt.
Resist,
but he just kept it going. It was great.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I was just starting to get a handle on doing interviews that sounded good to listen to. Like that summer, actually, I had to thank Quan for that. There was a project called StoryNet that Dwayne Wilkin was running, and he hired me to do sort of a little side gig. It was 10 interviews with English-speaking musicians around the province. Bobby was one. Then I produced some documentary, audio documentary from those interviews. But because I had that project, I have a friend of mine that's a radio producer in Montreal. He also does podcasts. He's from the U.S. And we sat down an afternoon. He kind of laid it all out for me. You know, if you want this to sound really compelling, here's the things you want to try to get, you want to do during your interview. So his name is Shay Shackelford, and you should check his stuff out too. He's an excellent radio producer. So let's start with let's take a step back. I think any practice needs a bit of philosophy or theory to sort of ground it. I'm not going to talk about this too much, but I want to just start by contemplating the following. What is it that we would like to document and learn through an oral history interview? Okay, so bear with me a bit. I think I'm generalizing, but our Western society places a strong emphasis and preference for objective facts over subjective experience and interpretation. This is especially true in our primary and secondary education, especially in the public system. I think in university, it's less true, especially nowadays, but I think we grow up with this notion that history, I remember in primary and secondary school, it's about memorizing dates, events, and names of famous people. That's the activity of learning history. We need to get our facts right, and these facts, that's the true stuff of history. And these facts get written down in history books where they can be more faithfully passed on and not subject to, slight modifications in the story or large ones. You were telling me about was it your dad who was the police detective, and he'd get 3 different versions. So in this context of this sort of preference for like objective facts, like when, what, who, what's the and also this preference for writing history as a written thing. What's the place of oral modes of relaying history, of which there have been many with us for tens of thousands of years? We have myths, sermons, storytelling practices, informal or formal. In grade school, we all learned, or a lot of us learned, the example of the broken telephone, which is basically what was happening with what Grant described too. But facts get distorted through different tellings of a story from one person to the next, whether this is by faulty memory or purposeful embellishment to make a better story. So it doesn't seem like the prospect isn't great. Like, can we trust oral history? So there's an Italian oral historian named Alessandro Portelli, and he's written a lot about the subject. And in an article from the early 80s, he does a great job of identifying what he considers the principal subject matter of oral history. And here's what he writes. He writes, "Subjectivity is as much the business of oral history as the more visible facts. What the informant believes is indeed a historical fact. That is, the fact that he or she believes it, just as much as what really happened." So to make this idea more concrete and less wishy-washy, he gives the example of a labor strike. And he says, oral sources may not add much to what we know of, for instance, the material cost of a given strike to the workers involved, but they tell us a good deal about its psychological costs. Right? So this is, I agree, I think this is the primary value of oral history. It's not the only value, but I think it's a primary one. It brings to the wider domain of historical research and heritage preservation. It gives us, I think, a more direct window into firsthand experiences, especially of what we might call everyday people, but it can apply to anyone. Anyone has an oral history. And it's about how those people interpret the world around them. This is what's, I would say, is often missing or muted in more traditional historical research. So, we're looking for things like how people interpret significant life events or events in their community. How did they feel? What changes did these events bring to them or their community? So I'm going to stop there. We have a little philosophy to keep in mind, and I think we can use this to start thinking about some practical matters. But I thought I'd just pause here. If you guys have any questions on that, you can also just deny it all outright. But yes, Stephanie.
I'm the one always, I'm sorry.
Go.
But there's a thinking that's really interesting about history and facts, as you were saying, because when Native people started to make Native history, or when women started to make women history, some people called it self-history. But isn't it winning a war, talking about the generals by a white man, also from the elite, is self-history? So in my opinion, facts don't really exist. because there's always many ways to look at one thing that's objective. So I think by doing oral history, we're rather giving these voices to all the different point of views to one thing that we'll never know exactly the truth of anything, because we're all just subjective living, subjective experiences.
And I know we do have a few historians in here, and I know oral history can be somewhat controversial. I think it really started to experience it was first became a subject people were interested in maybe in the 70s into the 80s. My timeline might be a little bit off, but it is fairly recent. I know it wasn't greeted warmly and initially by historians. And I think, over the years, it's been more or less embraced, but I still think people are maybe a bit cautious with it. So if anyone is a historian and has, finds certain aspects problematic, feel free to share that too, or not,
My experience working for First Nations communities in the past has been problematic, because the courts are more willing now than they were for many years to accept oral history in terms of, or in relation to land claims. And courts would routinely dismiss oral history as undocumented or subjective, as we were talking about. And I think we've turned the page on that. And I'm hoping the practice of history in general and how historians understand what they do is turn the corner as well. You're right. All the names and dates and all of those things may be important to people, but my sense is the practice of history has evolved beyond that, and so we are understanding that the truth as it's internalized, or reality, whatever you want to call it. Maybe these concepts themselves are problematic. As they're internalized and expressed through personal experiences is far more important now than it has been in the past. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded, excuse me.
No problem.
I think that's why fiction actually has much more history in it, in fact, that we can trust in terms of getting to know a time when it played, historically, than in fact these history books.
Yeah.
That's a very important.
The dates and the personages are pretty much a structure on the scaffolding on which the stories are built, and you need that structure. But as everyone's saying, everyone else's point of view gets around that. So if you read a lot of different stories, a lot of different points of view, you still have the structure, the scaffolding is still the same, but you get a lot of different perspectives on that.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. Yeah, lovely. So let's jump into some practice. Okay, so I think this is actually confusing. Oh yeah, that's why. That's really loud now. So what we're going to learn, how to listen, how to ask questions. These things may seem trivial, but I assure you they're not. Overcoming awkwardness and getting a grip on your recording gear, what I call how not to fear your gear. And this is a little excessive, I'll be honest, but this is not for oral history. So, okay. Principle 1, I call this your silence is golden, and I think some people presage this a little bit. So yes, in the first two clips, this was a problem. I find when I listen to that clip of Joseph Drowdy talking about cod fishing, it's very distracting, which is what I think Stephanie said, and Janice, you mentioned the ticking clock. And it's entirely my fault for a number of reasons, but it's not his fault. His descriptions are rich and colorful, but I believe it was you said, I keep interrupting, I keep affirming what he says. I'm like, oh yeah? Okay, really? Or I'll just repeat what he said. He talks about, using herring as bait, and I'm like, oh, so herring was the bait. Like, he just said that. But, so this sort of practice is something we do in everyday conversation. It's not really a problem. It's a fairly normal way of being in a conversation with someone, but it makes for a chaotic listening experience when dealing with the recording after the fact. So indeed, I think this was probably the main difference between the interview with Joseph Drowdy and the one I did a year later after I had a bit of training with Bobby Hill. With Bobby, somehow I managed to keep my mouth shut for a whole 3 minutes. And he had time to explain everything. He had breathing room to say everything he wanted. Whereas the interview with Joseph sounds kind of frenetic because I keep interjecting with these useless affirmations. So there's maybe even a more insidious side of these verbal affirmations. They make it very difficult to use our audio of our interviews for anything other than just listening to the interview itself. Say you wanted to extract a little bit to use in a podcast or documentary. Generally, you're going to have to edit out each of those verbal affirmations, and sometimes you do them while the other person is still speaking a little bit. So this is, because I've had to do it, it's incredibly time-consuming, and even if you spend, a week editing out each of these, and it's really thankless work, what can happen is your resulting audio will sound quite choppy. You want to minimize the amount of editing you have to do, so you want to keep your tape as clean as possible. We say tape, now it's all digital, but that's really what you want to do. So I think as beginners, we actually may even blurt out these affirmations more than we would in normal conversation. I have a theory why this is. It's not proven. I think for a lot of us, it might be, and this is how I feel, kind of a mitigation strategy. We're trying to convince the interviewee that, oh, we're just having a friendly chat. You don't need to worry about the fact that, there's a recorder in front of you or I'm holding a microphone. Just a chat, just relax. But this, I think, brings me to something, I know not everyone will agree with this, but I think it's worth stressing. And I think it's crucial we come to terms with or try to. Give it a chance. It's this. An oral history interview is not just a friendly chat between two people. It doesn't mean it's not friendly, but it's not a friendly chat. And I don't think we should ever actually frame it that way to our interviewees. You can disagree with me, and actually, I think good interviews can still come about when things are framed that way. But I do want to say, this thinking of it as not a chat, it helps us realize that interviews are not two-sided dialogue. They're very one-sided. And apart from the brief time we spend posing a question, our jobs for the rest of the interview is to simply listen in what I call pure attentive silence, right? So this is why I say in interviews, your silence is golden. Not theirs, yours. So at first, I think you mentioned it's very uncomfortable not to verbally affirm, or maybe it was you, Jody, I'm not sure, but it's really uncomfortable. It feels like there's this horrible vacuum of space because you're not engaging to what they're saying. You're not, this is the way we show them we're listening, right? And I remember this when this bad habit was pointed out to me. I'm like, what else can we do? So, what my teacher told me, and, later my radio producer friend is, we can show them rather than tell them that we're listening. So instead of these useful verbal affirmations, we can use our body language. We can lean in a little closer. We can nod, a silent chuckle if they say something funny, even holding your chin like in an intense moment. Now, you don't want this to be contrived, but, be sort of natural. But I would say these fulfill really the same function. It shows that we're listening, and I don't think they really notice that we're not interjecting with these verbal affirmations we would normally use. I love how you guys really, you were ahead of the curve on so many of these things, but like I think you said, if they seem to pause, don't just jump in with your next question. They might just be taking a moment to think a bit more deeply about what they're saying. And sometimes the most insightful parts come when they pause for 5 seconds, and then they start talking again. And people need time. Matthew.
Just a comment. Your second interviewer, though, Glenn, not to beat yourself up so much, he was very articulate. And he knew exactly what he wanted to say. I think he was a really
He was a good interview.
subject.
He was.
Maybe not so much for the first one.
I think Joseph would have been if I'd gotten closer and I'd stayed out of the way. Now, Bobby did have a background in radio. He talked about being on CFCF. But I've had great interviews with people that don't have any training in, radio elocution and all that sort of stuff. So I think, Jody, do you have your hand up?
Well, I just wanted to, anyway, I don't know if this is appropriate, but I just feel like with the pandemic and having done so many things on Zoom, I'm actually a lot better at having a conversation with someone without having to verbally interact with them all the time. Just because on Zoom there's always talking over never works and nobody can hear anybody. So I feel like Zoom was a
We've
good
gotten better.
to get us used to not having to feel the need to verbally encourage people to.
That's a fascinating observation, but it's totally true. you know. And even though I'm good at it in interviews now, I'm still terrible at it in regular conversation. I do. It's just like, I think Thomas was saying earlier, it's really hard to change your speech patterns. They're so ingrained.
And we bring that nervous energy into an interview, right? And so we're
Exactly.
excited and nervous, and we're trying to compensate and make it seem really good. And yeah, we do all that.
There's so many things to worry about in an interview, but you do get, after you've done a couple, and you can work on these sort of practices I'm talking about sort of one at a time. You don't have to do them all at once, but I would say slowly start to try integrating these. So let's move on to how to ask a question. This is something I think many of you may already know. How we ask questions is as important as the questions themselves. And I think the main distinction we need to make is between so-called open and closed form questions. And I'll start with closed form, or some people call directed questions. These can be answered with a simple yes or no, or a single word, or a single sentence. But what we call open form questions, these are just phrased in a way that tends to provoke richer narrative, and I'll give you some examples. So consider the following ways of basically asking the same thing. Were you a firefighter your whole career? This could be answered with a simple one-word yes or no, or just one sentence. For example, no, I've only been a firefighter for the last 10 years. But if what we're really interested in this interview is their overall experience of being a fighter, why not ask just, tell me about your time as a firefighter? This is an open form version of the same question. In that clip with Bobby Hill, where he's detailing how he wrote that song, all I asked him was, I'm wondering if you can tell people a bit about the Ballad of Rocket Richard and how that came about. Then he gave me 3 minutes of uninterrupted narrative where he vividly describes the scene, his feelings, and his interpretation of the significance of the events in Montreal's history. So this is a short section, but does this distinction make sense to everyone? I think it's pretty concrete. And I think a lot of you probably already know it. I know Heather, we've talked about this before. It's something an idea you've been exposed to. So you don't need to avoid closed form questions entirely. They're very useful for quickly establishing critical biographical factual data. So when and where someone was born and raised, where they went to school, that sort of stuff. But a good interview should have a mix of open and closed form questions, and probably more open form questions than closed, I would say, if we want to get rich narrative. If they miss something in one of their big wide open discussions to one of our open form questions, just ask a closed or directed question immediately following to ascertain that bit of fact that you think is really critical, where and when they were born, what their parents' names were, etc. So let's move on. I wish I could show you the slideshow I made, but it's online. It's called Technological Awkwardness, and there's a guy with headphones on like I am. He's got a bag on his shoulder, and he's got a giant boom pole with a fuzzy microphone at the end of it. And this is what people who record audio in films, that's often how it's recorded. So it's kind of a ridiculous picture, and I realize also maybe I'm a bit of a ridiculous picture right now too. Okay, so we're ready to start talking about technology and the social dynamics of interviewing. I think it needs to be said, interviews are fundamentally a contrived exchange. We can do everything we can, but I think nominally they're always going to be a bit contrived. They're not part of our social interactions normally. And to make matters worse, we're often using some recording gear at the same time, whether that's audio recorders, microphones, video cameras, studio lighting, depending if you're doing video. All these things we bring in, we know that can make someone nervous to speak. So what a lot of beginner interviewers try to do is minimize the presence of their gear. They'll be like, oh, I'm going to put this far away out of sight, just so not to spook the person. And then we might also reassure them and say, as we're taking the recorder out of our bag, and they ask about it, say, oh, don't worry about this recorder here. We're just going to have a friendly little chat. Just pretend it's not there. But I think the thing is, as soon as you pull out a recorder and a question sheet, it's no longer just a friendly chat. And the interviewee knows this, and if you tell them otherwise, depending on their disposition, but I think it risks coming across as insincere or dishonest, and your strategy may actually backfire. It might make them more nervous. So here's my advice. I know it's a bit counterintuitive. My advice, and try this, don't minimize your technology. Openly acknowledge that it's there. Be comfortable with it yourself. Talk about it. Tell them in simple terms how each piece you pull out contributes to the recording and the quality. So, for example, if you're trying to get the microphone nice and close to them to get a clearer sound, we'll explain how that makes them sound clearer on the recording. Most people will appreciate being made to sound clearer, just like we like being photographed in a flattering light and from a flattering angle, you know? And I think people will understand this. If you have to pull out a piece of gear that's conspicuous or looks ridiculous, like this windscreen, which we use for recording interviews outside, Heather's made fun of it many times. You know, make a joke about it, like compare it to a little toupee. You know, say I'm just going to put this toupee on, and you can tell them why. You know, if you're outside interviewing them. I think this helps put them at ease. It makes the technology less threatening if they understand what it's doing. And it's really, it's very easy to explain all this stuff in simple terms. You know, you don't have to get into audio formats and bit rate and all that stuff. But, you know, I think there's the main things that will spook them. You can explain to them why you're doing it and why that's going to make them sound better. And really, again, like, you have to be comfortable with your gear. If you show that you're nervous about it, I think you're more inclined to make them nervous. That applies to a lot of things in life. The most important thing in an interview, generally speaking, if you want to put your interviewee at ease, you also have to be at ease. And I know it's not easy at first, but you know, as we bring in, you know, a little bit of technology, a question sheet, we get in a little closer with the mic, that sort of stuff. We need to just be confident and at ease and guide them through it and be open and transparent about why we're doing what we're doing. I actually think, and this leads into the next topic, I think, quite well. It's ethics of interviewing. I think, you know, I don't want to talk about the specifics here of how to write a consent form. I want to summarize how I get verbal consent from interviewees. So this is my practice. You don't have to use it. But I think verbal consent, when done well, can go a long way to making people feel more comfortable as well. So I'll be upfront and say, I really don't like starting interviews by making the person sign a consent form, generally speaking. I know they're often a requirement for some institutions, especially universities, in which case you have to do them. But I think it can make things overly formal and off-putting at the beginning. Basically, and here's why. We're basically asking the people to agree to a bunch of terms about the interview and how it will be put to use before they've even spoken, before they even know what they're going to say. So instead, I usually use a combination of verbal and written consent. And for me, it's the verbal consent at the beginning that sets the stage. It lays the groundwork for the whole process, and I think establishes that trust. So here's what I do. When I get to that, you know, as I'm setting up my gear, I ask them if I can start my recorder, and I immediately start conveying to them the fact that they get to have a share in controlling what gets recorded and how it's going to be used. So here are a couple of things I will say right off the bat. First, I say, you can ask me to pause the recorder at any time during the interview. If you're not happy with something you said, just tell me, and I'll delete it from the recording. If there's a question they don't feel like answering, they can simply ask me to skip it. I'll also discuss if I'm maybe pondering some future uses, like maybe a podcast or a documentary, or even an archival repository that I think I might be donating my interviews to. I will bring all this up and ask them if they would be okay with that, and I'll say, you know, we can iron out the terms later, but you know, these are some things I'm thinking. And then once an interview is finished, I will then revisit the stuff we went over verbally through a consent form, and I have my check boxes, and I try to keep it as simple as possible. And I think this happened to me. I think it can depend. Some people are more or less comfortable with consent forms, but I've worked a lot in areas of the province where you can't always assume like an even level of literacy. And even if, you know, they do read fine, like a consent form, it's a lot of information, often condensed, and like there's a certain language sometimes they have to be written in. So I think that's why the verbal piece, and also some of our cultures in Quebec communities, they do exist more like you're as good as your word, you know? And I think it's important to honor that as well, and not just only force a consent form on a person. I feel like I'm giving consent forms too bad a rap here, but that's my perspective on it. So, oh yeah, just an aside I need to make. I think a lot of us have done this. I've done it. I regret it now. A lot of beginners do this, especially like when they're really, really green, like their first interview, and they're nervous to ask someone. They think this will make the interview more natural. But what I would say is never ever hide your recorder during an interview. Don't record surreptitiously or obscure in any way the fact that you're recording someone. Don't beat yourself up if you've done it. But when you think about it, it is unethical. I just like photographing someone without their consent. Also, if you are eventually want to donate this to an institution like an archives, it can make your interview ineligible to be archived in the first place. So just don't do it. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, don't beat yourself up if you have. Okay. Any questions, thoughts?
I have a question.
Mhm.
I did an interview once. We did the whole, just the formal paper. It was a good interview. Then he called me up about 2 days later and said, I don't want you to use it at all. And it's like, I don't know what he found to be the problem. I thought it was a good interview. He was talking about horses and the land, and maybe it was some sort of fight he had with a neighbor. Who knows? He didn't bring it up, but it was not. He said, no, you may not use it. So I deleted it, but it seems such a shame, that
It
he couldn't
does.
use it. And he did sign the form, but I thought, well, he's in control of it. I guess I did the right thing.
I think you did, definitely did the right thing. And with the recognize, sometimes we're going to lose these interviews that we put a lot of work into, but it's, c'est la vie a bit.
Yeah.
Perhaps if, he knew he had the option that a segment could be deleted, it may have changed something, maybe not. Who knows? We don't know. But sometimes I might inquire if there's something I could do to change it, and nothing.
Can I just cut something out of it? No, the whole thing
Yeah.
had to go. So
Yeah.
For the sake of peace in the community, I just deleted
Yeah.
it. It was such a shame. It was weird though.
Yeah, it can happen. Yes, Ed.
We recorded some family histories. We're going back maybe 3-4 years. And I don't think that we ever obtained any permission to do that. And so does that mean then these are now invalid?
I think it can depend on the archive of the institution. I better not, because we have some experts, we have Jody and Rachel, among others. What would you guys say? Okay, Jody?
They make them unusable in the short term. Is like the by and large probably blanket. Everyone would see it that way. There is more scholarship now about orphaned oral histories and legacy oral histories and what to do with those, because many collections are filled with oral histories that were done in the 70s and the 60s before the idea of consent was a thing. So we have to wrestle a little bit with what to do with those. But if your interviewees are still alive, I would encourage you to approach them now and ask about permission so you have that.
Matthew?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ed.
Isn't there a sort of a tacit consent, though, if you're subject, and there's a discussion at the beginning of the interview, here I am sitting with Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, we're obviously recording this discussion. I mean, they're kind of giving their consent, at least to be recorded, maybe not put into a podcast.
Yeah, I agree. There is something to that, and I think that works. I mean, sometimes, especially for, I think, smaller institutions, that can be fine. And like you said, Jody, the practices have changed. I think for journalists, that's often more how the consent works, For oral historians, it has changed. But I agree, I don't want to be too black and white. I want to give you, a snapshot of the practices I've adopted, But yeah, I would go through it, and I mean, I don't know. I'm willing to lose a bit of tape. If I have to cut something out, or they want to skip a question. I think it's not a far stretch from what you're saying, Matthew, to a pretty easy to understand verbal consent at the beginning, and you don't have to be super formalistic in how you phrase everything. I find it less intimidating than using a consent form.
We have worked with Concordia, for example, on some of the projects, and the consent forms can be rather intimidating. You mentioned academia, and it's just, wow, really? I mean, we have to do this with everybody, and it's just really awkward.
I agree. Yeah. And I know some people will disagree, and like they're involved in like the ethics boards of universities, and they have a firm belief in why it needs to be this way, and I think it's also valid. But as practitioners, I agree it makes it awkward, and that's why I start with verbal. And I think that really trust is something that's developed over time, including during the interview itself, and that's why I like to start it verbally. Yeah, Rachel.
Just to clarify, you record the verbal
I do.
consent at the beginning?
Yeah, exactly, and that's intentional. Yeah, and then I ask them if I'm going to say I'm just going to start the recorder. Is that okay? And usually it's fine. And
Well, I agree with all of what you said. I think Jody's right that you should get the consent
If possible.
if possible. But I think as soon as you have, because I don't think that it's implicit. Like if, let's say, I interview an elder and then 10 years later I use this, but the family says, no, you cannot use it, and then it can be in trouble. So I think the more clear it is, like, do I have your consent, Mr. So-and-so, to use it, then it's clear for everyone.
Exactly.
That's what I think.
That clarity is really important because, when
Yes.
someone, like you said, orphaned interviews, and sometimes you're
Yes.
dealing with descendants, and it can be a bit tricky. Jody.
Well, and I just thinking, like, it's one thing when we're using the oral histories for the initial intent and purpose that we set out to do them, but then it gets, but then we're talking 20 years down the road, and we maybe want to put them into a podcast, into some sort of use that was never imagined at the time that it was recorded. So someone was agreeing to a use for a certain purpose, and we want to use it for another purpose. And that's where I feel like the ethical parameters of it, especially in maybe larger archival institutions, it gets a bit, it's a long reflection process of trying to figure out what ethically is a proper use for the material. So there's sort of like that aspect, is like intended use and implicit consent versus what in 20 years or 10 years we might want to do with it.
And it's hard to predict the future, like technologies that just didn't exist. And
We're going to be in a hologram.
Exactly. coming next year to Colby-Curtis.
That underlying all this is the fact that Quebec introduced legislation last year that significantly increases the obligations one has to use information that can either directly or indirectly identify someone. So the burden on the producer in terms of what one can do with personal information is a lot heavier than it used to be.
Yeah.
And so I think you're very right. Everyone said this. Transparency is the key, and getting either verbal consent or written consent of some kind, I think is more important than it has been in the past.
Indeed.
Shall we talk about gear? Sure. All right. Thanks for all your insightful comments. I'm actually, I guess I'm not surprised, but I maybe thought that would be one of the more dry sections, but you guys have a lot to say, and it's touched upon us. And like, my early interviews, the consent was very much implicit. They knew the recorder was there, but I wasn't a academic researcher at that point, and I wasn't thinking about these things. And I have maybe 30 or 40 interviews with people that are of that nature, and some of them have died as well. So I wish I'd known sooner. But okay, so let's talk about gear. So the section is called "Getting Good Sound and Why You Should Care." I'm just going to offer some suggestions on how to use your recording gear. Foremost, I think it's really important to realize that you don't need to spend thousands of dollars on microphones and audio recorders. You can get a very good handheld digital recorder for under $200. They come with built-in microphones made by brands like Tascam, Olympus, Zoom, not the Zoom we used for video conferencing, the other Zoom. And these are all you need to start getting great sound. So why should we care about getting great sound? Isn't it enough that we just managed to record an oral history interview, period, and that we have that person's testimony and it'll be available for posterity? Well, I think the answer is primarily depends on if you have maybe other uses you're envisioning down the road. And if that's the case, I think getting good sound is paramount. But I think given that it's not too hard to get really good sound, like the Bobby Hill sort of sound I got there, I think we should always aim for it if possible. So what are a few things we can do? Always wear headphones. So here's the analogy. Would we ever take a picture without looking through the viewfinder? What kind of result would we expect if we took a picture without looking? Recording audio is very much the same way. There's a few reasons for that, but it is very risky to record without wearing headphones. So mainly because we don't know what the recording sounds like until we get back home. And sometimes we're quite nasty. There's a nasty surprise waiting for us. One of those is that a lot of microphones are very sensitive to noise sources that our ears aren't. Our ears naturally tune them out, but they pick them up plain as day. Someone tapping their fingers on a table, a loud fridge, AC running, that sort of stuff. So that's why I wear headphones. And even when I was picking up my shirt to come on this trip, you'll notice there's headphones and some boom boxes and some cassettes. So I'm a walking proselytizer for wearing headphones. Also, it makes the technology very visible, but then this goes back to what I was saying. Don't try to minimize. I would actually rather be very transparent that, yes, a recording is being made. So we're wearing headphones. What are the considerations next? Proximity is a very important one for good sound. After you have your headphones on, you want to get your recorder as close to the person as possible. This is what makes the difference between audio that I would call simply a document of what was said versus audio that has the potential to pull a listener in. So forget about putting your recorder in the corner or even just a few feet away. I know it sounds scary, but you're going to need to sit close to your interviewee and hold the microphone close to their mouth. If they seem nervous, again, just let them know why you're doing this. If this is to bring clarity and make their voice sound nice and rich, just tell them. And your comfort will reassure them. I find people usually forget after about a minute and a half that you're holding a microphone in their face. Like once if you start asking open-ended questions and you show that you're listening in this engaged way, they're only vaguely aware that there's a recorder in front of them. So how close is close enough? You do need to use your ears, but thankfully that's not possible because you're wearing headphones. I would say 4 to 12 inches. It does depend on the type of microphone on your recorder or if you're using an external one. For these sorts of recorders, I find 4 to 12 inches is a good guideline for the kind of built-in microphones that come with these recorders. Two things happen when we get close with our microphone. We hear the interviewee much more strongly in relation to all the ambient sounds in the room that our ears don't pick up. Or if there's an open window with traffic coming in, we're going to hear them much more clearly, and it will be able to tune out all the other sounds. The other nice thing that happens, most of the time this is a desirable effect, is that the bass frequencies in their voice will get boosted. This will make the tone sound fuller and more present, as if they're speaking right into our ear. This is called the proximity effect. It occurs on microphones which pick up sound sort of directionally, like more from the front and sides, as opposed to omnidirectionally. So I know someone brought a little clip-on mic there. Bring that up for a sec. Thank you. So these are the, let's see if I can, I'll change the camera angle. Thanks for bringing these. These are the lapel mics often used by filmmakers. These are omnidirectional. They pick up sound equally in front, the side, behind. We won't get this bass boost proximity, but that's okay. It's still important to be close. It'll still make the person sound much more clear in relation to their surroundings. So that's a bit of some of the advantages of getting in close. But there can be some problems. So brace yourself, but they're easily solvable. Certain sounds can kind of distort the mic when you get close. There's two sort of notorious categories of letters that will distort the mic when you're close. We have what are called plosives, and then we have sibilant sounds. So plosives are like P, like there's always this expression.
Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. If you do that in your mic and you're hearing the P sound, the beginning of the P, like sort of get all like muddy and sort of distorted, that's a plosive. It's an effective. It just happens with a lot of microphones. The sibilant sounds are like S's and Z's. So S like sizzle. It's like wind rushing over it, and it really actually what it is. When you say those sounds, wind rushes over the capsule of the mic, and it tends to distort it. So what we can do to mitigate those for the plosives, you'll see there's a foam here. If I'm recording inside it, you can put like a foam over your, and sometimes they come with a little foam over that will help. Don't hold it right in front of their mouths. Hold it just a little to the side, and that makes the air from your mouth not directly hit the capsule. So yeah, not like this, just a little bit to the side. And the sibilance is greatly reduced by windscreens, especially like this one, but even this will help a little bit. This is always just a conversation starter. And it will do a much better job. It really rejects not just sibilance, but the sound if you're outside and there's a lot of wind. You almost won't even notice that there's wind. Whereas if you did it, with the capsules uncovered, that's all you're going to hear. So I want to just play a bit of audio demonstrating the proximity effect. I know you've probably heard it in the 2 interviews at the beginning. With Joseph Droughty, the recorder was out of the way and you heard me more than him, and the ticking clock, and just the room, the echo of the room. Whereas with Bobby, it was so much better. Yes, Grant?
So did you have the first time, was the mic on the recording device on the table?
The first time, yeah, it was on the table, but it was far. Okay. With Bobby, I was knee to knee with him, and holding it in his face. And so I'll play some audio I recorded the other day just to really demonstrate it. It's a very mundane dialogue. My apologies. This is an audio test. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is the impact of close miking when recording oral history interviews. In this test, I'm speaking into the Zoom H1N handheld recorder with the gain set to about 65% of the maximum. The recorder is currently sitting on my desk at a distance of about 4 feet from my mouth. This is an audio test. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is the impact of close miking when recording oral history interviews. In this test, I'm speaking into the Zoom H1 handheld recorder with the gain set to about 65% of the maximum. The recorder is currently in my hand, about 6 inches away from my mouth. So, I know, like, if you're feeling a bit awkward, that's the reward. If you're willing to sit close and hold it, and then you can, if you ever want to make a podcast, it's so much easier. And so, yeah, okay. We're getting towards the end, so we've got a great start in getting good sound. There is a control on all these recorders. There's usually a dial. On this one, it's here. On this one, it's on the side. It controls how sensitive the microphone is to a given sound source. So in a way, it's a way of making the audio louder. And we need to set that correctly. Let me just turn the page here. Let's see. So the headphones are important in this process, but they're not sufficient. We also need to use whatever visual indicator there is. So usually, if you turn on your recorder, and if after this workshop, if some of you want to see where this is, there's usually these visual meters, these 2 bars that go up and down as someone speaks or music's playing or whatever. You probably won't be able to see it from there, but there'll be bars going up and down. And so what you want to aim, and this one's distorting right now, I can see, is you want to see peaks. There's a number scale underneath. I would say you want to see people, the loudest moments as they speak, because we do speak louder sometimes than others. I would try to aim in like the -9 decibels to -6 decibels. And like I said, there's a number under there, so you can see where the meter is. And that's also, like, that will also contribute to that rich, kind of more radio-like sound. Just remember, or know if you don't know, if you see it starting to hit 0 decibels, 0, it doesn't sound dangerous, but the audio scale starts at like minus, infinity, or like around like -60, and it goes, the maximum it reaches is 0. And what happens at 0 decibels, you get distortion, which on digital recorders, which these are all digital, it's just 1s and 0s, When we get distortion, unlike on analog tape, it's unusable, it's unlistenable. At that moment where it hits zero. And if it keeps hitting zero, the audio is just trashed. So this is why we need to use the headphones, but also, take a peek down at your meters and adjust your gain as needed. So there's a caveat to this. And some people think, oh, this is great. I can just make the recording louder. Now I don't have to sit as close. So I'll just crank the gain up as far as it'll go, and I'll put the recorder 4 feet away like I wanted to do originally, and it's going to be great. They'll pick up the voice. It'll be nice and clear. The problem with that is it amplifies everything equally, including all those table taps, chairs squeaking, fans. So it ends up making, yes, it makes them louder, but it makes everything around them louder, and then they're again competing for the ambient sounds in the room. So don't try to get smart. Just sit close and get your levels right. Okay, any questions, comments there? No, I'm getting a bit more technical, but there's not too much more. Yes, Ed.
You talk about decibels and you say minus this and minus that, but isn't noise on the positive side?
No, it's not. Everything is on the negative scale in decibels. It's okay. Sorry to nerd out. It's what's called like a logarithmic scale, and so it works like inversely to how normally we would measure stuff. So noise, it's a perfectly acceptable sound, and it registers in decibels. What I would say is most noise in like a room, like maybe fans running. It does depend. Computer monitors, even lights, sometimes have a hum. You're usually getting like around sometimes minus like somewhere between minus 40 and minus 30 decibels. And so if the recorder is too far away and their voice is only coming in at minus 20 decibels, it's not that much stronger. You want to get their voice in like the minus 9 to minus 6. And sorry, I know I'm getting like super specific here, but yeah, it's not positive. It registers somewhere in the negative scale. Of course, if you're on an airport runway, the noise floor is probably going to be at 0 decibels. So, very loud, but never positive. The scale stops there. It's where it maxes out, and the signal just gets chopped off, and we can't make sense of it anymore. All right. So, a final consideration. Speaking of noisy rooms, I think it's important to find or create a quiet room when we arrive on site for an interview. We don't know often until we put our headphones on that a room is actually quite noisy, and this is again. I'm all about the headphones, right? So this is why. We know microphones pick these up better than our ears. So when you get to an interview and you're setting up your audio gear, put on your headphones, try to start setting your gain, and you might notice that it's a really noisy room. There might be a buzzing lamp, a computer monitor. Older computer monitors are terrible for buzzing at 60 hertz. There might be a radio in the other room that you didn't realize someone's playing, or a TV, someone on the phone. Dehumidifiers, that's a bane of our existence right now. At our apartment anyways. There might be a loud ticking clock, like in Joseph Droughty's interview. So within reason, I will ask if any of those sources of noise can be turned off, at least for the interview. Or I'll ask if not, if it's just like there's too many to contend with, I'll say, is there a quiet room? Often people have a den, or a living room where there's lots of furniture, carpeting, and this helps absorb the sound. It helps dampen all those ambient noises. So that's what I would suggest. My American radio producer friend told me what he would do if he arrived and the interview was, say, in a kitchen and the fridge was quite loud. He would ask them if he could put his car keys in their fridge and unplug the fridge for the duration of the interview. So when the interview was over, he couldn't leave without plugging it back in to fetch his car keys. You don't have to be that bold, but he's been doing this a long time, and he's very comfortable asking for that. So, but yeah, I would say that also is very important. I just assumed all the pros had professional studios. It's not, it's not like they might have better microphones, but people that produce podcasts, they go around with equipment that's very much like ours. I mean, ours is what we call prosumer. They're often using professional gear, but it doesn't substitute the fact that they need to use those same techniques of close miking, avoiding plosives, holding it a little bit to the side, and all the dynamics of interviewing, open-ended questions, all that sort of stuff. Yes, Matthew.
When you're driving in your car and you're being interviewed, this happened to me with
Okay.
CBC Radio, and I'm driving, giving a driving tour of the town of Stanstead, and my entire muffler fell off the car. Edit it out.
Yeah, you can edit, for sure. But editing is a lot of work, and my mantra is always try to get your tape your recording as clean as possible to begin with. You'll save yourself dozens and dozens of hours in editing. There's this idea you can do everything in post-production, and you can do a lot, but it's it's rough work. Yeah. Okay. So final technical advice. You're gonna might laugh. Make sure you're actually recording. Sounds obvious, right? But it's happened to me. It's happened to me a number of times. And I think, we're so preoccupied. We have gear we're pulling out. We're trying to get our levels. We're putting on headphones. We're trying to make them feel at ease. All these other things that are distracting us from the fact of whether or not we actually press the record button. I've gotten home or ended an interview to realize I never pressed record. This recorder was very bad for that. Some recorders, and this comes from like the tape days, they have a standby mode. So when you first press the record button, you'll see it blinking. You think it's recording, but it's in standby mode. I don't know why. It's a relic, like I said, from the tape days, but too many times I was just in standby the whole time. Wow. So somewhere on your question sheet, big bold letters, before your first question, make sure you're recording. Then write it somewhere else later in the interview. Double check, triple check it periodically. You might actually have a microphone, an external one that's battery powered. The batteries can die. How you would know is you would see your audio levels have dropped to 0. So that also check your audio levels from time to time. You don't have to stare at it. Yes, Ed.
I have a practical question.
Mm-hmm.
How can we access this workshop?
Well, I'll send you this PowerPoint you guys can't see and these notes.
Because I'm a representative and, other people would benefit from this.
Well, I'm so glad to hear.
This workshop.
Yeah, and I wrote it in pretty plain language, complete sentences. It's not just my normally fragmented thoughts. so yeah, I'm hoping it will be helpful. I'm glad you asked, and we can distribute it one way or another, even if it's just informally. No, it'd be my pleasure. So I have some final considerations, but they're very specific and kind of varied all over the map. I don't think I'll talk about them, but I will email them to all of you if you are interested. There's stuff about recording formats, the little storage cards that go in here. One bit of advice I will say, because it relates to the recording, make sure you're recording, bring a backup recorder if you can, even if that's just your phone, in case something went wrong. Sometimes the storage cards in these devices, we call them SD cards, they get corrupted for some unknown reason, and you get home and you can't play the file, even though you were recording. So some kind of backup recording, I think, is a good idea. I think that's it, and I will send this around to anyone. Any questions, comments, your thoughts, just as we wrap up today?
You did a great job there, Glenn. That was
Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate it. Well, thanks all for being here. It was great attendance, and you guys had such amazing insights and perspectives as well. So thank you for that. All right, you're on.
Thank you, Glenn. Yeah, that was wonderful. And I think all of us have had some kind of experience. That's why we have all those questions for you. But we all can relate to all of a sudden standby mode is still flashing and, that kind of stuff. So certainly when we were doing our Scandal Maker series, we double check that, make sure the record button is flashing because we have that standby mode in our system too. It's called a Marantz, and it's this handheld thing that we have to sort of make sure it's propped up underneath a person, if standing beside a gravestone, so that it catches all the noise, and it does catch all the noise. So it's pretty intense sometimes with the equipment. So, but this has been super helpful, and I know you'll be available for some questions after we go offline, and
Exactly.
we're going to be doing that momentarily.
Yeah,
so
feel free to bring me your gear, and we'll take a look at it and all that.
So we are at the end. On behalf of my colleague Glenn Patterson, who's done such a great job this afternoon, not only managing all the gear, but also doing this great presentation. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for all of you attending. I think it was a great afternoon, and so before I go, I'd like to thank the folks at the Colby-Curtis Museum, the wonderful Stephanie Robert, who's been our contact and our guide and enthusiastic supporter for us to come here, to Marguerite Dunlop and Kathy Lusty Curtis, the dedicated women who know their oral histories and have given us a beautiful example of how to do them, to Ed Peterson from the Bury Historical and Heritage Society, to Wendy Durant from the Lennoxville Ascot Historical and Museum Society, Jody Robinson, archivist of the Eastern Townships Resource Center, Judy Bachelder from the Georgeville Historical Society and her sidekick Judy as well, Judy too, Rachel Lamby, the curator of the Lac Brome Museum, Matthew Farfan, the executive director of QAHN. Thank you for your time that you've given us today, the stories you told, the objects that you brought, the books, all the material. It's been wonderful. You've really helped to make this fair, this get-together, a great experience. And all of you that are preserving and protecting the history of the townships, it's second to none what you do. So thank you very much for everything that you are doing on a daily basis. And our thanks, Thanks. And our thanks goes to the board of directors of the Colby-Curtis Museum and its staff and the volunteers who've so warmly welcomed us today. And so I'll shout out to Callista Photo and Kim Prangley, Anne Montgomery, Vicky Cheney-Gagnon, Muriel Chaplot, and Samuel Gaudreau-Lalande, the director and head curator. So thank you very much for what you've done for us today as well. Again, thank you to Glenn, a digital media specialist, all-around great guy, and the kid that's been running back and forth between the cameras, to Thomas Gasser, our technical assistant, who's making sure that all the video components and audio are broadcasting live without any issues, although we did have a few issues today. Thanks again to our funder, Canadian Heritage, to our QAHN members across the network who've tuned in today, and everybody who came in person. Thank you very much, and that's a wrap for us from QAHN. Thank you.